Chapter 23. The Defiler. "Ah, perfect," Ronin said, as he took a deep swig of the taste-optimized water, then leaned back in a lazy stretch. He felt as if he'd lost weight. His movements were smoother. There was a lightness to his step, and his range of motion was better than ever. After going through that horrible ordeal, he'd passed some sort of barrier when it came to his body, and it showed. Any old remaining injury he'd had was now gone. His head still hurt, though. There was no avoiding that. And concerning the topic of headaches, what had happened yesterday was so bad, he'd been avoiding looking at the news all day. All he knew was that whatever he'd done to the Happy Pearl restaurant, that place probably stunk to high heavens by now. Ronin himself had been in the bio-rinser at least 10 times already, but that damn remnant odor still wouldn't leave. Let's just not think about it, he told himself again. He still had a ship to build. He placed the water can to the side, then put the micro-spanner in his mouth as he went back into the hemsway. His arms and face, now grimy with oil, moved with purpose as screws were fastened, panels were aligned, and electrical sockets were installed. The fusion drive was already set up and ready to go, and all that was left to do to complete the ship were the final parts. Spending a few hours on the cockpit and on the internal lighting, the shuttle was finally finished. Well, it still needed a paint job, but he could do that later. Ronin, struggling to contain his excitement, did a final round of pre-flight diagnostics. The diagnostic screen first showed the internal heating system as green. Then, the anti-gravity module lit up. This one seemed to be fine as well. The fusion drive lit up. The airlock, the lighting, the drive controls. It went on. Hundreds of green lights filled the screen. Everything looked good. It was time. Ronin had the factory bots move the hemsway onto the runway, following closely behind as it moved into position. He then entered the airlock, squeezed himself into the cockpit, and turned on the engine. Vroom! "Oh, now I get it," Ronin muttered as the deep hum of the fusion drive reverberated throughout the hull. So that's why the engine's more powerful. Those who made this ship did it because of this feeling right here. Ronin felt as if he was riding a wild beast. The whole ship was literally vibrating. The hairs on the back of his neck rose, and he had to hold himself back from clamping down on the gas pedal. This ship wanted to fly. Ronin willed himself to look at the diagnostic screen he'd brought along. Everything still seemed to be working properly. He coupled his implant to the ship's flight controls, then activated the anti-gravity module. The ship next smoothly rose up from the ground, hovering just a few centimeters above the concrete below. "Now let's see if you can fly." Ronin placed his hand on the control stick, then pulled it back as the 3-meter-long shuttle began to rise. "Slow and steady wins the race," he murmured, affording himself a quick glance out the side window. He was now 20 meters up in the air. He gently pressed the gas pedal, and the ship began moving forward. Moving his hands over to the steering wheel, Ronin next pushed it down until the hemsway pointed directly up. He increased his speed. Everything still looked nominal. It was time for a real test. Pressing the gas pedal all the way down, Ronin sunk into his seat as the hemsway shot up towards the sky, only going faster and faster. Boom! The ship began to shake as it pierced a series of smog-laden clouds, and Ronin couldn't help but grin. This was it. This was what it was all about. He kept going until the concrete forest below turned small, and he entered the upper atmosphere. He let out a laugh in excitement. "Ha ha 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 ha! Yes! It works! It works!" There was only one final test left now. Continuing up, he exited the atmosphere entirely, exposing the ship to the vacuum of space. Ronin eagerly gazed upon the stars, but as he was about to turn to the diagnostics screen one final time, the whole cockpit flashed red. "Warning! Warning! Unregistered entry into the planet's military border detected. Turn back immediately, or be shot upon." The blood-red text flashed ominously across the ship's viewport. The whole planet is a military border? Ronin was reminded of what Olsen Skar, the CLM supporter, had told him back on Exodon. He said the government killed his son when he tried to leave, but my parents weren't born here, they came from Hartheim. It's clearly possible to travel between planets. If Ronin was going to travel off-world, perhaps he'd need to register the trip with the government first. Either way, he could look into this later. The test was over, and the ship worked exactly as described in the blueprint. He turned the hemsway around, then began to descend back down. This was the first ship he'd built, and he'd succeeded on his first attempt. This was not only a confirmation to himself that he knew what he was doing, it was the first real step he'd taken towards achieving his dream. Returning to the factory, Ronin climbed up on one of the beams along the ceiling, then hung himself upside down as he began doing sit-ups. He was still tingling from the rush of having completed his first spaceship, and nothing helped release that rush more than a good workout. 25, 26, 27. He counted until he reached 100 reps, then rested a little. As he was in the middle of his next set, however, a certain bald-headed student walked in. Ronin?" Ronin paused, then looked at the upside-down Simons. "Just a moment. I'm almost done," he said, then proceeded to do another 20 sit-ups before dropping down. It was about a 6-meter drop between him and the floor, but with his body the way it was now, he could take it. As he landed on the ground, Simons's eyes shot up in shock. "What's up?" Ronin asked, flashing a grin. "Ready to work? I've got a couple of designs ready for us to practice with. You should—" "Before any of that," Simons interrupted, taking a deep breath as he calmed down. "Disregarding that crazy jump you just did. Yesterday, we all suddenly had to leave right as you entered the toilet. You knew, didn't you?" Simons nudged his implant, then sent Ronin a series of links to various news feeds. Ronin sighed. "I'd rather not look, but I guess there's no avoiding this anymore." "They're calling it an act of bioterrorism," Simons said. "Hundreds got injured in the panic, and there are thousands of cases of unconsciousness. Several stores, restaurants, and banks have also had to close. Just what kind of an organization have I joined? I deserve to know." Ronin's optical implant displayed news report after news report, and it did not look good. He raised his hands in surrender. "All right, look. I will neither confirm nor deny any involvement in this." He made an awkward cough. "Happy Pearl incident. But say, purely hypothetically speaking." "Hypothetically speaking," Simons echoed. "Hypothetically speaking, yes. If I was involved in any way, it would have been entirely accidental. I sometimes get a very bad stomachache. It's related to why I can jump down 6 meters and still be fine. Yesterday, I may have been taken by surprise as I went to the toilet. But something like that will never happen again." Simons narrowed his eyes. "A bad stomachache? I gave up a lot to join this company. If it turns out that this place is some sort of criminal enterprise, I'm telling my father." "No, there's nothing criminal here," Ronin hastily said. "There's no need to worry." "All right, we'll see," replied Simons. "And you should probably look into that last link I sent you. If you don't want to get hypothetically caught, that is. Ronin opened the link, and a bounty notice popped up. Wanted. The Defiler. At 41 hours, 23 minutes Standard Time, during the 4th day of the 3rd month, 3,421 AI, a brutal act of bioterrorism, was committed in District 22. Any information shared, if it leads to the capture of the Defiler, will be rewarded. Reward: 10,000 TAR credits. Contact the Planetary Guard via the link below. The only image on the bounty notice was that of a golden codpiece. Ronin scrunched his nose as he recoiled from the document. This did not look good. "Yeah," Simon said, noticing Ronin's reaction. Other than some contradictory statements regarding the color red and the existence or non-existence of a power armor, the fact that there was a golden codpiece involved is all they know. At least, that's all they're willing to share. "Why?" Ronin asked. "According to the news," Simons began, "all the people that went unconscious around the area are experiencing memory loss. I'm guessing the smell was so bad, it caused the people that experienced it to block out the memory of it or something. Well, at least Ronin hadn't been exposed yet, but he really needed to do something about that golden codpiece, and he needed to do so quick. He gave Simons free access to the factory equipment, then sent over the instruction manuals. "Focus on learning the 3D printer and the assembler first," he said. Ronin next headed directly for the Hero Maker, stepped into it, then walked it over to the assembly area. "I don't have the blueprint for this thing, but I do have an instruction manual," he thought as he exited the suit. "It should suffice for the codpiece at least." He brought out a measuring tool, then sized up the golden object. It sticks out by a whole 7 centimeters from the armor. "Maybe I could repaint it to make it less visible?" "No, it will still stick out. There's no hiding something of this size." Ronin could only shake his head. Inspecting the codpiece closer, it seemed to have been fastened to the suit by a series of tiny screws. As a first order of business, he should at least drill those out. He needed to see what he was working with. Ronin walked over to one of the nearby storage cabinets, then picked out a power tool. At least this part shouldn't pose a problem. As he began drilling, in short order, the screws piled up beside the power armor, and he popped off the codpiece. So that's why it's so large. Where the golden bulge had previously been, there was now a thick cluster of wires wrapped around a battery. If Ronin wanted to make the codpiece flat, he'd have to press all of this stuff further in. He began to drill out more screws, opening and removing armor plating as he traced the path of the wires. Interestingly, the wires under the codpiece connected to several different circuit boards. There were circuit boards along the suit's legs, along its arms, and inside its chest. He began with the circuit boards along the Hero Maker's legs first, disconnecting the wires that ran from the codpiece to the boards. Ronin turned on the suit again, then inspected the HUD. "The silent mode function is showing error messages now," he thought. He couldn't have that. The silent mode was not only convenient, but it could also save his life if he was ever outmatched. Ronin turned off the Hero Maker, reconnected the wires, then moved on to the suit's chest area. The circuit board here was massive. He removed the wires that connected to it, then inspected the HUD again. This time it was the dance program that showed error messages. So that's where that void forbidden thing comes from. Ronin knew what he should remove now. He next began redirecting and removing wires, and after some trial and error, he managed to connect the battery in the crotch area away from the dance program and onto the energy shield system instead. Then, with a little bit of brute force, He got both the battery and the now reduced cluster of wires far enough in to make the codpiece flat. Switching on the Hero Maker, it now showed a 10% increase in battery life. If anything, this was a win-win in Ronin's eyes. Now all that remained was to fix the codpiece. He picked up the bulging plate, then headed for the 3D printer. "Hey, Simons?" Ronin asked. "Yes?" The round youth was currently studying the printer. "Want to try making a codpiece?" Simons made an uncomfortable expression. A codpiece would indeed be a good thing to practice with, but wouldn't that make me an accessory to the crime? "Look, I'm still not saying I'm the one who did it. But if I did, think about it. You're the only other designer in the company. You left the restaurant just before the smell began to spread, and you still haven't informed the planetary guard." Ronin made a casual shrug. "In the eyes of the law, I doubt a codpiece is going to make much of a difference at this point." "Don't tempt me," replied Simons. "I still might call them, you know." "But yeah, I guess you're right," he sighed. "All right, toss it over." "So you'll do it?" Yeah, just give me the damn thing." The codpiece flew through the air, and Simons reached out a hand to grab it. Ronin next walked over to pat his new collaborator on the shoulder, but the man jerked away. "No, stop!" Simons cried, covering his nose. "Oh, mighty heavens above! Now I know why so many people passed out." About 5 minutes later, after Simons was finally done retching, the gold-colored abomination had been melted down, and a new codpiece was taking shape. Ronin, meanwhile, headed towards the assembler. He now had 2 new objects he needed to paint. Chapter 24. New Techniques. After painting both the Hero Maker and the Hemsway, Ronin spent the next few weeks working on his mind palace. He'd done all he could with regards to the Happy Pearl incident, and he'd already found a way to remove the alien energy from his mind. He'd even gotten back into the academy curriculum. And though there was still a lot of work out there to be done, some things were simply too important not to prioritize. He still had a bounty on his head after all. There was no telling what people would do for 3 million credits. He needed to deal with Spectre. To get to this man, though, he would need new techniques. And with last time's failure still fresh on his mind palace would have to be as perfect as possible before he opened another gate. That's what led to this moment. Ronin looked at the singular crack running along the wall of the mental spaceship. He'd spent 3 weeks' work of effort on this, and this last crack was all that remained. "Finally, I get to fight back," he whispered. Conjuring up another piece of metal, Ronin placed it inside the opening, then began using the blowtorch. Then, only a few minutes later, the cloud of fog that had been hovering over his mind now for months lifted, and he felt a surge of energy run through his body. It was almost as if something fundamental about him had just changed, as if he'd become more complete now somehow. Ronin walked up to the gate he'd chosen, then leaned up against it. He closed his eyes and focused. There was a distinct feeling behind the gate of sneaking, hiding, deception, and evasion. Ronin nodded to himself. Out of all the gates in the Potentia panorama, very few gave off a feeling of stealth, likely due to how domineering the alien who'd gifted him this legacy was. But this gate, although a little large, felt just perfect. Centering himself, making sure he was absolutely ready, Ronin gave the gate a firm push, and with a poppy, it blasted open, flooding his mind with knowledge. Hey, are you all right? Do I need to call a doctor?" a voice asked. Ronin, bleary-eyed, shook himself. "Hang in there," the voice said again, and Ronin felt a foot slam into his face. "Stop it, I'm fine," Ronin said weakly, finally able to see who was bothering him. Simons, like an orbiting moon, hovered over him, looking visibly nervous. "With the way you were shaking, like you were having an epileptic seizure or something, you're definitely not fine." Ronin, still weak from the memory infusion, lifted himself up into a seated position. "This is just something related to my medical condition. Don't worry about it. I knew this was coming." "Like when you went to the toilet at the Happy Pearl?" Simons asked. Ronin rose up to his feet. "Please don't bring that up," he grunted. "Shouldn't you be working on that racing ship of yours?" During the last 2 weeks, after familiarizing himself with the machines, Simons had been working on one of the free designs. The 5-meter-long racing ship, however, had proven much more difficult to build than it first appeared. Ronin had even tried to help out a little, but this design still seemed to be out of both of their leagues. After some more back and forth, Ronin finally managed to get Simons to leave him alone, and he once again entered his mind palace. There were some new cracks along the mental spaceship, but nothing too serious. He looked inside the newly opened gate. Snapshot. Any opponent needs senses to interact with the world, but no sense can be fully focused at all times. This is the realm of the snapshot. Reap the fields of strife with the inattention of others as you bathe your path in blood. This should work perfectly, Ronin thought. There were plenty of moves and tricks here to work on, but most relevant to him right now was the human eye blink. A part of the technique essentially described how to move out of other people's eyesight. Every time a person looking at him blinked, if he could move efficiently enough and to the right position, Ronin could effectively become invisible. But to continually remain invisible, he needed more. That's where the second technique came in, presenceless. By donning a mental mask strong enough, anyone around the warrior can either be forced to look at the warrior or someplace else, deceive the opponent, and forcibly create a snapshot when there is none. Differently from snapshot, presenceless seemed to rely more on psychology. Specifically, it dealt with the unconscious body language of different forms of aliens, and in turn, how to influence that body language. At least some of this knowledge should work on humans, right? Ronin wondered. Either way, he would need to do some practical tests. If he could find out what worked in each technique, then master it, he should be able to put a tracker on Argus. I probably won't be able to wear the hero maker if I'm going to do this, though, Ronin thought as he returned to reality. He had anticipated something like this happening before he opened the gate. But considering what he was about to do, well, it made him feel kind of naked, to be honest. "Simons," Ronin called. "Think you can hold down the factory while I'm gone?" "Sure, no problem. But are you sure you should be out right now?" "Don't worry about me." Ronin gave Simons a thumbs up, then stepped into the factory warehouse, entering one of the rooms off to the side. Before him lay a set of gray-colored overalls, a gray hoodie, makeup, and a liquid that could change eye color. This would be his only protection now. The 3 million bounty was still very much active, and there was no doubt that there were numerous assassins out there, just waiting for a golden opportunity like this one. Ronin bit the proverbial bullet, then put on the gray clothes. He next covered his 2 lightning-shaped scars with makeup and dropped the liquid onto his eyes. He walked up to a mirror on the wall. It was as if a completely different person was staring back at him. Both his budding black hair and brows now matched his eyes, and his scars were gone. He no longer looked emaciated either. In fact, he sort of looked like a normal person. Ronin nodded to himself. It would have to do. Roughly 10 minutes later, Ronin was in his now azure-blue Hemsway on his way down into the city. As he descended, the common blue and green neon lights slowly changed into a more unsavory red, and the surrounding restaurants and shopping centers were replaced by pubs, casinos, and brothels. The bright red light from the sun next faded into a dusky dimness, and Ronin began to look for a parking spot. He should be far enough down now. Landing in a gated enclosure, he paid for a parking ticket, then left for one of the more crowded pubs. He donned his gray hood. Who knew what means others had when it came to recognizing bounty targets? Skulking his way down the street, making sure he stayed far away from the patrolling guardsmen, Ronin arrived before the pub. The venue was situated at the bottom of a towering circular building, and numerous drunkards staggered in and out of a giant revolving door. All right, go time. Pretending to be drunk, Ronin intermingled with the crowd, then entered. Loud music, even louder drunks shouting over said music, and the scent of hard labor filled the room. Ronin pressed past the rowdy crowd, not stopping until he found himself a vacant corner. He leaned up against the wall. I guess I should first don a mental mask. Let's see. What sort of image would be more effective? According to Presence Lists, the more terrifying the scenario he imagined was, the more Ronin's own body would subconsciously react. In theory, this should make anyone noticing him instinctively look away. He had to believe in the mental image he conjured up, though. So, which sort of scenario would be enough? Ronin thought about the fear he'd felt when he realized that his breathing mask didn't work back on Exodon. No, the fear of not being able to breathe is not direct enough. It has to be something concrete, like a man, creature, or an event. Ronin then thought about the terror he'd felt in the abandoned city, when the Eisenschaft radiation mutated Argus's hunters into monsters. It could work, but there was that one memory in his mind. It wasn't his, but if he could use it. Ronin recalled when he possessed the four-armed alien. He focused on the moment when the alien punched the fractal gate, and that dark, foul energy rushed out. "Have any of you encountered any Ruddles lately?" a man near Ronin shouted. "I think we're finally starting to get rid of them." Ronin tried to tune out the noise, and the mental image of the horrific event became clearer. "That's just media propaganda," another man broke in. "We all know the expression, how did it go again? Ah, now I remember. How do you know when the media is lying?" Several other pub dwellers followed up in unison. "When they open their mouths." The crowd broke into laughter. Ronin, now entirely immersed in the mental image, felt as if the universe itself was ending. Fear, horror, and desperation washed over him. He wavered. He felt as if he was on the brink of collapse, but he kept going, strengthening those negative emotions. More. More. He was about to die. Everything was about to die. "Apocalypse," Ronin wordlessly muttered. He compressed it. All of that fear, that horror, that desperation, he forcibly molded it, forging it into a singular image. And with every ounce of remaining strength he had, Ronin placed that image across the room atop the bar counter. Something shifted, and the alien energy within him moved. "But anyways, I don't see many of them any." The man talking about the Ruddles, mid-sentence, made a casual glance towards the wall. His eyes saw a figure there, but before his mind could register what his eyes saw, for some reason, His entire focus was drawn towards the bar counter. The conversation around him picked up again, but it became difficult for the man to follow along. His eyes just kept wandering over to the bar, again and again. Ronin studied the man closely. It was working. Next, others around the distracted man began to notice, but as they looked at him, they also started unconsciously glancing at the bar. Be it by noticing Ronin or by noticing the guests already affected, more and more people became distracted. As presence-less spread across the pub like an unseen plague, before long, the once rowdy atmosphere died down to short grunts and snippets of half-formed conversations. Hundreds of heads now intermittently turned towards one location, and one location alone. In the middle of this bizarre display, Ronin pushed himself off the wall, then began walking out. Not a single soul noticed, though. They didn't even register his existence, or that he ever had existed at all, for that matter. There was something else on their minds. The bar counter. And the funny thing was, not a single one of them had any clue as to why. Outside the pub, Ronin quickly found a bench to sit down on. Leaning back, he let out a deep breath. I never imagined it to be this draining. The technique took too long to set up and couldn't be maintained for long either. He inwardly sighed. Well, I guess that's why people practice. He could choose an easier mental image, but that would reduce the potency of the technique. Argus was an influential member of the underworld and likely had plenty of guards. If he was going to sneak up to such a man and place a tracker on him, he'd want as strong a mental mask as he could muster. Continuing to breathe heavily, Ronin gathered his strength, all the while carefully watching his surroundings. And after half an hour, he felt ready for the next technique. The issue was, though, how in the world should he test it? Snapshot was based on moving out of other people's eyesight, but he'd look like a total weirdo if he did that here. People would notice. No, that was not stealth. That was acting like a clown. He needed somewhere less crowded, like an alleyway. Looking around, he spotted a dark passage behind the pub. There were people around the passage, but none nearby actually seemed to be walking into it. Doesn't seem like it's used much. Yes, this should do just nicely. He rose, then began casually making his way towards it. Nothing to see here, just your normal... Well, who does hang around a pub in the middle of the day anyways? Before Ronin could find the answer, the badly lit passage was before him. It was empty for now, but that could change. He walked in, then crouched down behind one of the nearby trash piles. Hopefully, he wouldn't have to wait long. Step, step, step. You've been hyping up this place for weeks now. A voice rang out along the empty passage. Are you sure this place is for real? I know how your memory gets when on a bender. From within his hiding spot, Ronin's eyes lit up with anticipation. His first practice targets were here, and it had only taken 5 minutes. Listen, the Red Velvet ain't just cheap. It's one of the best brothels in the valley. Just wait. They've got this new girl, Starly, and I'm telling you, her skills with her hands are legendary, to say nothing of her looks. Another voice argued back. The two inebriated men continued discussing the place they were going to visit as they walked further in. Then, as they reached Ronin's hiding spot, he stepped out. Spotting the gray-clothed, hooded stranger, the men became visibly nervous. But the moment they blinked, Ronin disappeared. Did you see that? One of the men asked. I saw it too, the other replied. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. Let's just get out of here, all right? Ronin shadowed them, mirroring one of the men's movements so closely he was but centimeters behind the man. And as the two drunks hurried up, Ronin kept pace, breathing down their necks as he did. One of the two drunks, now jittery from fear, next turned to his friend, about to say something. But then he saw it again. The gray man. Blink. Ronin disappeared. The drunkard, however, was so scared at this point he was shaking. "Behind you!" he screamed. "Run, Carl! Run!" Both men began to sprint as Ronin jogged after them, doggedly keeping pace as he tried to stay close. As the two ran out of the dark passage, though, he had to let them go. There was no point in following them out. "Tsk!" Ronin spat, frustrated. The point of snapshot was not to scare them. Predictably, the technique was harder to do with more people around, and as a result, he'd messed up the timing with one of the men's eye blinks. He'd failed. It appears I'll have to spend some more time mastering this as well, Ronin thought. He went back to his old hiding spot and waited for more people to enter the passage. Then, as the minutes passed, he heard it. Step, step, step. The sounds of footsteps could only mean one thing: a new victim. Wait, no, a new practice target. This time it was a lone stranger. "Now we're talking," Ronin exclaimed in his head. The lone figure approached, and Ronin walked up to the man, waited for him to blink, then moved. Minutes turned to hours as Ronin altered between practicing presenceless in the pub and doing snapshot in the alley. He didn't notice much of an improvement in the beginning, but as the hours passed, he got better. He could now put on the mental mask faster and hold it for longer. He could also consistently stay hidden from up to 2 people with snapshot now. Calling it for today, Ronin snuck his way back towards the gated parking lot. Humming to himself, a slight smile played on his lips as he flashed his parking ticket to the guard and was let inside. He entered the Hemsway, flipped on the engine, then called Nagata. The hologram activated, showing a smoke-filled room, and in the middle of it was the familiar, hazy-eyed uncle. "Yes," Nagata said. "How's the progress on Argus?" Ronin asked. He pulled the control stick back, and the Hemsway began rising off the ground. The older man nervously rubbed his hands together. "Is this really the only way?" Nagata sounded reluctant. "I'm sure there are many out there who would help you if you asked. Have you asked the planetary guard?" Just what had the older man found to cause such a change? "You mean the ones who locked me up on Exodon?" Ronin grunted. "No. But now that you mention it, someone did offer to help." He transferred over the contract he'd been offered by the Academy. Nagata began reading, likely a little slower due to the drugs running through his system, but his eyes quickly shot up once he reached further down. This is a slave contract," Ronin finished. "I'd have to give up everything I've achieved. All the funds I've accumulated, all future patents, my personal freedom, everything. 10 years of my life. That's the price." Only the soft hum of the engine could be heard as the uncle took it all in. Maybe I've grown soft over the years, but I never thought the Academy would be this domineering. Part of TAR's genius strategy concerns fostering goodwill between the chosen candidates and the state. It's what makes geniuses still want to help TAR after they leave the system. For TAR to try to shackle their geniuses instead. "Maybe they saw a unique opportunity with me," Ronin said. "Regardless, I won't sign it. So will you help me?" "All right." Nagata sighed. "But this won't be easy. You'll see that for yourself once I transfer the documents." The shuttle continued upwards, as the dim light above brightened up. If I'd had more time, the information would have been more detailed, Nagata said. Ronin's implant notified him of a large incoming file. Anyways, his uncle continued, most of the places Argus usually stays at should be in there. Just come by when you need the tracking device. Ronin gave the man a heartfelt nod. All right, thank you. I'll owe you one. Ending the call, he drove back the final leg of the journey before landing back at the factory. It was time to see what had gotten his uncle so scared. Ronin pulled up the documents. A blonde-haired, burly figure appeared on the hollow screen. Beside the image were data on his places of residence, his travel routes, surveillance systems, his subordinates, and more. Apparently, Argus had thousands of men under him. He was practically a warlord. Why would such a powerful man willingly serve someone else? Ronin wondered. He studied the documents closer. If what he read was true, Argus had spent hundreds of thousands of credits augmenting his body. His skeletal frame was enhanced. He'd had neural enhancers implanted into his skull. Even his endocrine system had been altered, changing his body's chemical balance so as to create a state of hyper-awareness when in combat. Ronin scratched his chin. Argus, huh? So that's what you look like. He thought back on the time his apartment had been blown up, the harrowing hunt, his time in prison. It doesn't matter how many men you have, Ronin thought. Once I master these techniques, I will find you. And after you lead me to Spectre, it's war.